All right. So welcome everybody to our latest edition of Optimizing Live. Today, we got my colleague, Randy Hale, as always, and Brad Swanson.
Hello.
How you guys doing today?
Excellent.
Doing well.
Awesome.
Great. So today's topic is rethinking agility in the age of AI. And, I'm curious out there, if folks are watching, if, some people may not even see the connection between Agile and AI. But, I think as I've been learning more about specifically generative AI, I'm really seeing, Agile practices, Agile principles being foundational to that. Whether it's, training your LLM or, iterating through some problem with the LLM, building out an agent, those sorts of things. So I think, particularly as organizations and individuals start leaning into generative AI, those Agile principles are in play all the time. And all three of us happen to be kind of long-time Agilists, Agile coaches, et cetera. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that today, of how does agility continue to play a role in organizations as well as for us as individuals, and particularly in this age of AI. So Brad, let's start with you. What are your thoughts in terms of how people need to think about and potentially apply agility when they're looking at generative AI?
Yeah, I love this question. So a lot of people, when they hear the word Agile, they think about frameworks like Scrum or Kanban, and a lot of people focus on just the mechanics of that process, sprints and retrospectives and daily stand-up meetings, and I do hear people ask, well, what does that mean now with AI? Is that stuff all still relevant? But I want people to think more deeply about the principles behind the Agile movement, not just the mechanics. So for starters, some of the key principles. Let's just start with that word Agile itself. That word Agile was selected because it indicates fundamentally the ability to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. And if there's one thing I think we all know about this AI revolution, is it means a whole lot of change is happening. Every day, every week, there's new models, new tools, new approaches. Things are just changing faster than I think we've ever seen change like this happen before. Yeah. So you've got to embrace that adaptability. Another core Agile principle is collaboration. The organizations that are succeeding with AI are ones that are remembering that humans are still central to getting work done. AI and AI agents are tools to help humans get work done. And the worst thing we could do here is send a bunch of individual humans off into their own little silos using their little AI tools all by themselves for weeks and months on end without talking to each other. In fact, I think AI means we need to be collaborating more closely than ever. And we need to carry that collaboration over now to AI agents. Both agents collaborating with each other and agents collaborating with humans. So mastering collaboration is going to be key to AI success. I've got some others, but I imagine Randy has something to say on this topic as well.
Yeah, I actually have like one pretty specific scenario that came to mind. So I'll share the scenario, and then, as you said, like we'll kind of zoom out and look at it from a principles perspective. I've seen where some organizations who are going through a transformation of some sort have some new set of practices that they want people to embrace. And while they're rolling it out, they're also looking at it going, oh, wait, like we have all these great AI capabilities. So, for example, instead of you going through like what we typically would have done with a product organization and having some collaborative sessions, working sessions to identify like who are the people you're trying to help, like what are the problems you need to solve for them, what are the activities and tasks that they need to do to be able to solve that problem. Literally, they're basically just saying, so do some interviews and then feed it all into Copilot and have it spit out like your whole backlog. And it's like, if you don't even know what a good backlog looks like, are you really going to just turn it over to AI and say, cool, that was easy, let's go build the thing? Like that to me feels like one of the riskiest things you could do is not knowing what good looks like yourself as the human in the system, just completely delegating it, taking the output and like not being able to even apply reasonable judgment to say, oh, you know, maybe this is close, but it should be tweaked, or maybe this is a horrific pile of crap and I should start over. Like if you can't make that distinction yourself, don't just turn it over to AI.
Yeah. Yeah. That prompted a thought. I read something recently from Saul Rashidi about how, at least so far, this is creating a challenge or compromising critical thinking, right? Mm-hmm. And I know I did it initially in like my very early days of playing around with ChatGPT. I would put in some crappy prompt and just take whatever it gave me and thought that that's all I needed to do. I quickly learned that no, this is an iterative process. The first thing in is not, or the first thing out is not going to be what you get. I'm also reminded in our last live stream with Kate Marshall, she referenced, garbage in, garbage out, right? So from a data or a backlog perspective, as you were just using that analogy, if we're putting garbage into the system, it's going to regurgitate some garbage for us as well. So I think that is either from a data perspective and even from a human perspective is we have to be really mindful of how do we understand what we're putting in either through prompts or data injection and making sure that what the AI returns to us, we don't just take it for granted, that we have a responsibility, and to Brad's point, quote, the human in the loop. We need to be interacting and holding on to that critical thinking of, does this output make sense? Is this providing what we need it to provide? And I think that's part of a natural learning curve, I believe. But I'm curious, organizationally, is that becoming a critical impediment that is getting in the way of organizations really starting to take advantage of this?
It certainly could. And you're going back to the principles that matter here. One of the other core Agile principles is continuous attention to technical excellence.
Right.
Again, the AI can help us, but without human judgment, human wisdom in the loop, as Randy pointed out, you can just blindly trust AI and go in a totally wrong direction.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been learning, I've recently started leaning into figuring out how to build my own agent. And again, back to kind of the correlation between agility and AI is, agents work very similar to how at least I, as a natural coach, tend to work. Is, there's an observation pattern that exists there. then the agent takes on some reasoning that, again, I, as the creator of that agent, need to iteratively help it learn. And then there's a point where the agent needs to make a decision and then take action, which I find is, I like to say, it's kind of OODA loopish, right? Is that little cycle is, again, not just advocating responsibility for AI to go accomplish a task.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a very agile way of processing information and then making decisions, which for me, again, as I'm learning slowly how to build an agent, that's really reinforcing to me, given, my years of being an agile coach. And I'm curious, what have you guys been seeing or doing yourselves that really bring that, not just the principles of agile, but even some of the practices into play?
So I have an interesting pattern that I kind of at some point became self-aware of how I was utilizing AI, which was I ask it something, I get a response, I do a bunch of back and forth to kind of hone it, but everything started with the initial prompts, which, as much context as you can give is helpful, but you only get one answer, and then you can help shape that answer. From a collaboration perspective, one of the things that I know the three of us have done together many times in many different contexts is you start with a bunch of different perspectives and you bring those perspectives to the table and you look at, like, maybe you're even synthesizing, right? It's like maybe two different ideas, get put on the table and there's good pieces of both and we synthesize to come up with a better answer. So one of the things I've started doing lately is, give me multiple answers, give me multiple perspectives. And, that whole like divergent, convergent facilitation technique that we use so effectively with people, try to replicate that with AI. So again, back to your question, Richard, like in service of effective collaboration principles, even if it's just me and my AI tool, I can try to replicate that effective human-based pattern in how I'm using the tool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that goes back to principles of collaboration and also cross-functionality that come straight out of Agile. So people have learned now that with AI agents, they tend to work best when each agent has its own specific role and specialization. So, you might have one agent doing design and certain agents doing back-end coding, front-end coding, another agent that specializes in testing, another agent that sole job is to be the security guardian. And you've got to, again, find ways for those agents to collaborate with each other, just as we have in the past when it was all humans doing those things. So again, the Agile principles, I think, apply there. One thing that's amplified now is the speed at which we can do things. So we used to, speak in timeframes of weeks to be able to get something tangible to show to a stakeholder, to a customer, to get feedback. But now that cycle might be hours. And so again, that just means we need to kind of crank up those Agile principles to a whole nother level now, because those cycle times are so much shorter, but the customer and stakeholder feedback is still absolutely critical. And in fact, that might become your constraint, where it used to be, well, it takes weeks and weeks to build, and that was our constraint in getting work done. The constraint now might be, I can't get feedback from stakeholders fast enough. The AI is outpacing my ability to validate what I'm building. So bottlenecks are shifting.
Yeah. I mean, Agile emerged in the supporting practices, et cetera, around it, emerged, to deal with complexity. And, we all talk about complexity, uncertainty, volatility. AI brings that to a level that at least I've not seen throughout my career, right? So AI is bringing much more uncertainty, much more volatility and complexity at a faster pace, to your point, Brad, than I think most of us have seen. And I think that still gives us a really solid opportunity to apply agile thinking to how do we deal with that. But the challenge, I think the bar has been raised, and how quickly can we make decisions? Your point on the feedback loops, I think, is spot on. Is it's even before AI, it was hard enough for a lot of organizations and teams to have effective feedback loops and to be able to respond to what they were learning quickly. Now, AI is a forcing function to say, we can't take everything to committee. We have to be prepared. We have to delegate decision-making out. And I think that is creating a new dynamic in terms of how organizations view complexity and how they are able to make sound decisions given that pace that AI is creating for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, building on that, Richard, the thing that came to mind for me as you were saying that was kind of the legacy organizational cultures, and how does all the communication and decision making happen? We all see it when we go work with organizations. If you're a leader, regardless of your level in the organization, you probably walk in the door Monday morning, look at your calendar, and you already have like 24 hours or more of meetings. Many of them are like standing meetings. And so I think tying it back to Brad's point of we can't get stakeholder feedback fast enough, that those things are often correlated, right? It's like we need to get these people together for this feedback, but like our fixed calendar blueprint prohibits that. So I think it's incumbent upon leaders and organizations to look at like, what are the standing meetings on your calendar and how can you rethink those things in service of shifting just how you work collectively as an organization to get more collaborative chunks of working time versus what we see all too much is like status, right? Like I go spend 50 minutes in a meeting getting status on something. Maybe I leave the meeting and like a decision wasn't even made, right? It's like, oh, we identified 2 decisions that need to be made and we're missing the 3 people that need to be part. There's a lot of dysfunction there. And so tweaking that system limitation to unlock better ways of working, I guess, is where I'm going with that.
Yeah, you just made me think of something I hadn't even thought of before, but I think what this requires now is an even greater level of empowerment that we've got to give to teams that are delivering products now. If we go back to kind of the original thought of a sprint, a 2-week sprint, why was that created? Well, it was created because back then, most organizations took, 3, 4, 6, 9 months to deliver something tangible. The idea of, hey, we're going to shrink that down to 2 weeks. That's kind of to force you to figure out how do we focus and deliver something tangible in a time frame which to most organizations seemed nearly impossible. But now, if you say deliver something in 2 weeks with AI, I could deliver like 20 things in 2 weeks. So we've just fundamentally shifted timeframes again. So kind of think of now we're in this new era where we're thinking of timeframes that previously would have seemed impossible.
Yeah.
So again, we got to shift our thinking around where's the real bottleneck in getting work done, and it's probably not the building part.
Right.
But in it, going back to empowerment, to make that work, we've got to give teams and humans clear vision, clear goals, and then empower them to be able to make decisions in that empowered mode more rapidly.
Yeah.
I think that's just going to have to be fundamental. But to make the right decisions, they've got to have the right guardrails, the right understanding of what the outcomes and goals are, so they can work towards those goals iteratively without having to wait for the VP of marketing to weigh in on this thing that I'm going to be iterating on multiple times per day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's huge. I'm going to tie that back to my earlier, how I work with AI. I think that coming up with multiple options and approaches, and then synthesizing to get to the best solution, that's something that we're seeing some organizations embrace, where they're not just assuming that they've defined the one thing that's probably right. They know that they need to do some validation and get feedback on it. But now with AI, you can build 3 versions of something faster than you could build the one version previously. So that's something we're seeing some organizations do, is not just assume that it's a single path build, but early on, maybe you're building multiple versions of something and not spending a whole lot of time, but generating something that is high fidelity enough that, to Brad's point, you can get the valuable feedback, right? What do you like? What works? What doesn't work? And then, maybe you're then synthesizing pieces of 2 or 3 different solutions. One of my favorite quotes I use a lot is, stop building the wrong thing sooner, right? So how do you get that feedback as early as possible and get it dialed in, so that then you can, remove that risk?
Yeah, right. So, Brad, you're talking about empowerment. So you're really starting to poke at one of our favorite topics, is organizational culture, and the impact of all of these things that we're talking about relative to generative AI specifically, the pace and the opportunity that exists. But this is pressure testing our organizational culture. And it's easy to say, well, we've been saying this for decades now with, those of us that are Agilists, we need to empower teams. Again, the idea of the 2-week sprint that you're referencing, I always like to emphasize, it's about that, shortening the feedback loop. But I see AI now pressure testing organizational culture, and, whether we're talking about creating autonomy and empowering teams, whether we're talking about, again, how do we make faster decisions, or what I like to call, decision agility. Again, I think this is really challenging the organization. And, we've been talking a lot in the past about, how teams are being constrained on what they can and can't do with AI within the organization. I think naturally this creates a tension, just like introducing anything else into an organization, whether you're talking about an agile transformation or a digital transformation of some sort. It's going to create tension in the organization. I think AI is creating a lot of tension, let's say, around data security and other governance challenges that the organization has, or the ability to make decisions as rapidly as AI is forcing you to. And these tensions, one of the things that I find really interesting, again, whether it's AI or something else, at the core, it's really about how do we manage the tensions that are being created, whether we want to call that some technical risk or some security issue, or that level of empowerment that leaders are willing to give to teams so that they can properly figure out how to apply AI in a way that is not just some one-off experiment or some novel little thing, but it's really starting to get built into our operating model. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that first, Brad. But for me, I do see that culture still persists and still is a critical component of figuring out how to integrate new ways of working now through AI into our organizational culture and our operating model.
Yeah, really good insight, Richard. I always like to use the quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast."
Yeah.
And we've all seen this. I think probably most people on this call have been through an Agile transformation at some point in time. And everyone's always recognized that, hey, culture is the key factor in sustaining that and long-term success. The same is absolutely true now for organizations going through AI transformation. So culture is the lens that leaders need to look through to understand how do we make AI succeed in the organization. In fact, there's a great model I like to use to understand culture, and I've got a visual. I could have Richard pull it up. This is called the competing values framework. One of the challenges with culture is that it's this kind of nebulous, fuzzy idea, and people kind of think they know what it is, but you can't really make it tangible. What I love about this model is that it allows you to get a tangible, measurable understanding of what culture we have within an organization. So here you'll see 4 culture types. Conveniently, all starting with the letter C here: collaborate, create, compete, and control. I'd have you focus on the values statement or the values words that are associated with each of those to get an idea of what each culture is about. But Richard, you used a keyword earlier, tensions.
Yeah.
The way to understand this model is that every organization is complex, and they're going to exhibit to some degree elements of each of these 4 culture types shown here. But as you said, there is a tension between these, and it's a tension that leaders have to manage in a lot of aspects of what they're doing. But in particular, if we think about an AI transformation, we've got to have the right balance between these 4 cultural value systems to succeed. So, for example, I could start with the collaborate quadrant. We mentioned this earlier. If you want to succeed with AI, we still need humans collaborating with each other and humans collaborating with agents. So we've got to master that and have enough of that collaboration. In the create culture, for a lot of organizations, AI it's giving you the capability to innovate. It's requiring you to adapt and transform the way you work. So leaders need to strengthen the characteristics of the organization that allow that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
In a compete culture, we've got to focus on, we've got to keep customers happy. We need to think about market share, profit. If we want to do AI right, it has to serve the purpose of the business or the organization, which is to succeed in the market. We're not using AI just because we want to play with shiny new toys. It's got to be oriented towards business results. So that's the compete cultural values. And then finally, control. This is where things like governance are going to come into play. We've got to, of course, be concerned about our data and data privacy and ethics and doing things the right way. So ultimately, we have to get to the right balance of these 4 culture types to succeed. And again, this framework can let you see, well, where do we live as an organization? Where do we have strengths and where do we have gaps? If we have a gap in one of these four, it's the job of leaders to fill that gap, to set the policies, role model the behaviors, create the structures that will enable us to get the right balance.
Yeah. And Brad, I appreciate that you used the word balance multiple times in describing that.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the misconceptions that organizationally, you say culture and people want to just identify or attach to one of these quadrants. And the reality is that in virtually every organization, there are elements, characteristics of all four of these in play. And that finding that balance and understanding how to balance these things for organizational leaders, I think is critical because, let's say we are predominantly a control oriented culture. I guarantee you there are still elements of the other three. And again, that tension, how that tension shows up can be healthy or unhealthy.
Yeah.
And, I often talk about, it's not about removing or fixing the tension. It's about finding that balance and understanding that maybe our primary orientation is around control because the products we produce are critical to, let's say we're creating medical devices or that sort of product. Obviously, we want very strong controls in place so we know that the products that we're putting out there are safe. But we have to be, responsive to these other dimensions so that we find that balance and the tensions can then be managed more effectively.
Yeah.
And, the alternate word is friction, right? So the less friction we have in our operating model and the way we collaborate across the organization, the less friction that we have to deal with, the much easier it is for us to adapt and respond to these things that we're having to encounter as an organization. So I definitely appreciate your emphasis on that balance.
Yeah, in fact, if you show the next visual, we can make that even more tangible here. So taking the same framework, we actually have an assessment, a survey that we can use to actually measure the shape of an organization's culture. So in this example here, if you look at the solid line shape, you'll see that it extends really far into the control culture. So that would be an example of an organization that has a very strong control culture. But then if you look in the create area, you see it's kind of weak there. So the dotted line shape might indicate where an organization needs to shift to if, say, they want to succeed with AI. They may need to rethink structures and policies and leadership behaviors to create a culture where more autonomy, more innovation, more new ideas are encouraged to strengthen those create characteristics. And that may require relaxing some of the control mechanisms. Not all of them. We're not saying, throw away the baby with the bathwater here, but there is that tension between those. We've got to find the right point, as you said, to reduce the friction that we continually feel between those.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I would add on top of all the great points you both just made is when we facilitate conversations and working sessions around this model, often one of the most eye-opening pieces to that is early on, we sort of get all of the leaders in the room to identify and connect with where are they most aligned. And a lot of times we'll even, have them physically go line up in corners of the room, kind of representing the quadrants. And it's so eye-opening. People look and they're like, of course, those are the people that are, most value aligned with a collaborate culture or a create culture. That just that activity is it's sort of like an organizational therapy. People are like, no wonder I'm frustrated by this part of our current system, or how we do this thing. But then it enables you to kind of bubble that up and say, right, like, none of these are right or wrong. It's just, what balance do we want, to the point of that last image, right? Like, we're over rotated on control, which is what we see 97% of the time. For me, it's probably 100% of the time. But we're over rotated on control, and we want to turn the dial on control so that the control mechanisms are more effective, and they enable greater create behaviors or greater compete behaviors. And then when you're working on this with leaders, to be able to have them see each other, and then find ways to collaborate to say, like, how do we want to tune these dials in tandem, right? If we're turning down control and we want to turn up create, let's get all the right people in the conversation to design that together. I think those are some of the most game-changing activities that I've seen come out of doing that kind of activity.
Yep, I've seen the same. And again, that's the power of that model, is it takes this nebulous, fuzzy idea of culture and it makes it now something tangible, something we can measure, something we can all talk about, and we can manage those tensions in a deliberate way, not in a kind of ad hoc, misaligned way with different leaders, but we all have a common target that we're aiming for in terms of those balancing points.
Yeah, here's a caveat to that I think makes it challenging still. So again, that last graphic that we looked at gives us a visual representation of, where do we think we are today? Where do we think we need to be in the future? But I think all three of us know, culture is not something you just flip a switch, right? And this takes time. It takes time to change the culture. It takes time to see tangible measures of the culture moving in a certain way. And that in itself is a challenge, because, often organizationally, we just don't feel like we have the time, right? We've got everything's moving at breakneck speed. AI is pushing the boundaries of the pace of change now. But one thing I think is still universal is it's how do we model the behaviors, and I'm speaking to leaders now, how do we model the behaviors that we need others to buy into so that we start to see this shift? And we saw this in the early Agile days as, okay, yes, we're going to do Agile, and that's for those teams over there. I'm fine. I don't need to do anything different as a leader. Again, I see that playing out with AI. If you're a leader and you want your organization to be, adopting AI or anything else, having any other form of transformation that is going to stick and that is going to be sustainable, you can't simply point the way. You have to model the way. Yeah. You have to, if you're not already doing it as a leader, you need to be learning how you can apply generative AI. How do you apply it in your role? If you're not rolling up your sleeves and doing the work yourself, that behavioral change is going to be much more difficult to attain. And this is something that, we can point to cultural models, we can talk about shifting our culture, but at the end of the day, it comes down to our behaviors. And are we modeling the right behaviors, whether it's for agility or for AI, so that the people that look to us for leadership start to get new experiences, they start to believe that this is meaningful and important, and then their behaviors start to follow suit.
Yeah, another key insight that, I talk about 4 levers that we have to affect that culture we just looked at. One of those 4 is those leadership behaviors. I like to ask every leader involved in an initiative like this, to identify what's one behavior that they would change personally.
Right.
Yeah.
It's going to move us in that direction that we've all collectively agreed we need to move, because every leader will be able to do something differently, some behavior that they can alter to reinforce that direction that we want to go. The other levers, by the way, policies, metrics, and structures. We have to think carefully about those as well. But without that fourth one, without, as you said, Richard, role modeling from leaders, people are going to see what their leaders are doing, not what they're saying, but what they're doing. And they're going to quickly see, well, that's what matters to this leader, because I'm seeing it, I'm hearing it, I'm observing it. So I know what's important to them based on how they behave.
Yeah.
Be the change you want to see in the world, right?
Indeed.
Yeah. So, back to our topic for today, rethinking agility in the age of AI. One of the things that I've been contemplating is, I believe, again, AI is, or rather, agile and agility is foundational to AI. But I also believe that if organizations are trying to use the same old playbook, they're going to be left behind. And what I mean by that is thinking about, again, from whether it's transformation. I believe, the age of big transformation efforts is dead or should be dead, because our success rate with big transformation efforts as organizations is pathetic, quite frankly. And again, given the uncertainty and the pace of change of AI, I think we need to rethink our playbook. And while Agile is still important and I think critical and foundational, if we're still trying to approach it in the same way we were 10 years ago, I think organizations are going to struggle and they're going to fail. And for me, quite simply, that means a bit of back to basics. I mean, Brad, you highlighted some of the fundamental principles early on. And while this may sound trivial, I think going back to those basic fundamental principles and then rethinking how they apply in your new context.
Yeah.
Because AI has already started to change how your organization is operating, whether you have a handle on that yet or not. And I think, we just can't keep using that same old playbook. The idea, for example, the simple example is the idea of, having, everybody in the same room together, collaborating in a certain way. Well, that's definitely going to be changing. So, for me, I'm trying to think through, for the people that I advise, of how can we adapt that Agile playbook and make it make sense and make it really fit given the pace of change of AI. And I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on, what sort of things might you suggest, still in the spirit of Agile and agility, but are looking at it through a different lens.
Yeah, I can start. The thing that immediately came to mind for me is going back to a lot of the large Agile transformations I've been a part of. I simply characterize that kind of an effort as it's a strategic organizational change effort, right? It's the Agile transformation flavor of a strategic organizational change effort. One of the core foundational pieces that has to be there for it to be successful is an understanding of the future state that we're moving to, and clarity on, like, what does that mean for all of the people in the system, right? What do I need to do differently? One of the things that often lags and becomes one of the chief impediments to any kind of a transition or transformation like that is if the organization doesn't take a proactive stance on understanding and digging into how are people incentivized both intrinsically and extrinsically. So we'll start with extrinsically, right? My bonus is based on these certain things. You're asking me to work in a way now that basically limits my ability to achieve, these variable pay performance goals. That's probably going to create a lot of friction as you're going through the transformation. But the intrinsic side is equally as important. Like, people are, have things that they value, that they enjoy doing. And are you looking at it through those lens, through that lens of, am I taking away for certain people in certain roles their highest intrinsic motivation? And being able to balance both of those things. Just because you can AI optimize something, you have to really look at it through the big picture lens of, if I'm killing all the intrinsic motivation of people by what I'm doing here, I'm probably not going to get the efficiency gains or performance improvement that I think I am. So making sure that human-centered viewpoint is present in looking at the big picture.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that human angle again. That's always been at the core of agility, is recognizing the humanity in all of us and focusing on what's going to keep us motivated. Going back to those principles, practices mentioned earlier, but I really encourage people to think about feedback cycles. Again, that's kind of the fundamental building block of all of our agile practices, and it's really just a matter of rethinking how fast those feedback cycles need to be coming in now. So same agile principle, but the questions I think you should be asking is a 2-week sprint appropriate? Or what does it really mean? What happens in a 2-week cadence? And how do we really think about feedback cycles there?
Yeah.
Does a quarterly planning session still make sense? And if so, how do we maybe tweak it to deal with the fact that 3 months from now, we might have, general artificial super intelligence, or, new models and new capabilities that we don't even know about when we're making the plan. So again, those cycles, we need to rethink how we treat those timeframes.
Yeah, I agree. So I wanted to also bring up, all three of us are going to be speaking at the Global Scrum Gathering in Vancouver next month. I'll be presenting a version of a talk that I've done many times over the last few years. It's kind of generically titled The Power of Cultural Awareness and Role Modeling. But naturally, I've injected a bit of an AI spice into it, and have started to evolve that topic. And it brings in some of the items that, Brad, you were showing, the competing values framework. So I'll be talking about cultural awareness and role modeling, both from an agility, organizational agility perspective, as well as AI. Brad, what's your talk going to be about?
Yeah, mine is also on the topic of culture. So I'll be expanding on what we talked about here in the session today, getting deeper into what leaders need to know about culture and the role they can play, the kind of steps they can take to shape that culture, to relieve that tension or fill those gaps that they see in their actual measured culture.
Nice. And what about yours, Randy?
My talk is product leaders, what's in your way? And it's a bit of a retrospective on some learnings I've had over the last 20 plus years, and a bit of a call to action for product leaders to not just be a participant in the system that you're operating in, but to be a catalytic change agent to improve the system so that you can deliver the impact that your company needs you to deliver.
Great. So you're watching this this session, if you're curious about, again, rethinking agility in the age of AI, consider checking out the Global Scrum Gathering in Vancouver, BC. Be lots of great speakers and topics on this. And before I wrap up, I want to give Brad an opportunity to also talk about some of the training that he's got available out there.
Yeah, so I touched a little bit on culture and the competing values framework. So I have a leadership agility course, which goes into that in depth. And we look at case studies of organizations that have managed to make those cultural shifts and give you an opportunity to explore what you can do within your organization to optimize your culture. And I also bring a ton of AI into my Agile training offerings as well. So if you're wanting to learn how do I use AI effectively as a product owner or as a team leader or as an executive, we've got a lot of content around that in those courses. So you can check it out from the QR code there or the URL shown there.
Great. Great. Well, again, thanks, guys. Great conversation as always today. And for those of you that got some value out of this conversation, please follow the Optimizing for Impact LinkedIn and keep an eye out on future discussions. So once again, thanks, Brad, Randy. Great conversation. Appreciate it. And everybody have a good day.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah.